Welcome to Up to So Good, the podcast that unlocks the secrets of creating a purpose-driven business so we can all make this world a better place. Come join the conversation. Hello and welcome to Up to So Good, the podcast that explores the purpose of business. I'm your host, Lena Monroe. It seems like the topic of psychedelics is everywhere. People are talking about the therapeutic benefits or the spiritual awakenings. Today's guest, Murray Rodgers, he wrote the book, literally. He went from being an oil and gas executive to a transformed leader, and he documents his experiences in his book, The Psychedelic CEO. Now, before we get into the episode, I'd like to share a bit of a disclaimer. The content in this episode is meant to share opinions and experiences and is no way a reflection of any official stance of either All Purpose or Up to So Good podcast. The purpose of this episode is to share and to explore. And we're not advocating for the use of any of this. If you choose to go down the path of working with psychedelics, please do your own research and only work with qualified professionals in that space. We are not doctors and we are not shamans. And I would suggest these types of things shouldn't be done recreationally. After many discussions and my own research, don't do this stuff on your own and don't do it just for fun. But this episode is definitely going to be fun. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and enjoy the episode. Hi, and welcome to Up to So Good, the podcast that explores the purpose of business. I'm your host, Lena Monroe, and today I have a very special guest, a very good friend of mine, as well as just someone I admire so much, Murray Rodgers, the Psychedelic CEO. Welcome to our show, Murray.
Thank you, Lena. Delighted to be here.
Well, I love that title, The Psychedelic CEO. It is also the name of your book, and we'll be posting a link to the book, which is just awesome. I've read it. I love it. I feel like I got to know you just by reading the book before I actually really got to know you. So why don't we just start there? What is the Psychedelic CEO? Who are you, first of all? Because your story is incredible.
Well, the who I was and who I am are probably two different things. And the Psychedelic CEO really was the bridge between two different states of being, if you will. I spent my career, the bulk of my career as a geologist and working in oil and gas around the world and being in a very capitalistic, dominant, patriarchal system, and doing a lot of science and a lot of exploration around the world and creating energy in different countries and that sort of thing. But the paradigm was always just about making money at all costs, and there wasn't a lot of attention or even awareness in the industry of the human cost. What were we really doing? What were we really accomplishing? And who were we in the middle of it all? And so there's really no attention paid to personal development, mental health, well-being and those types of things. Those were just simply not really spoken about. It was all about just getting the job done and really making money. And you're from Alberta. I'm picturing you as this oil and gas executive tycoon who was just like, you walk in a room and just, is that right? Is that how it was? Well,
you would just own the room.
Tycoon may be a euphemism, but anyway, I wouldn't say tycoon, but we were all part of that culture of really pushing hard and more, bigger, better.
It was a bro culture, isn't it?
Yes.
Very much.
Yeah, it was very much that. The purpose of the book really was all about to examine the current leadership development business and how that pertains to corporate culture. And the fact is that a lot of leadership development programs don't really work. And so a lot of companies now have embraced leadership development and coaching and that type of thing, but the changes are not really being seen. So it's kind of like ESG. There's a lot of lip service being paid.
Yes.
And there's a lot of greenwashing, that goes on in terms of climate change and also just social programs and that type of thing. But the fact is that behaviors typically aren't really changing that much.
Okay, but what happened though to prompt you to write the book, The Psychedelic CEO? Because here you are. I mean, you were very successful, and were you happy?
Well, that was the crux of it. Was that after all of that success, I found myself chronically depressed, drinking too much, feeling that the whole, that whole career trajectory had been quite pointless, because why wasn't I happy? After having achieved all of this. And certainly I went through a divorce and that type of thing, but many did. What occurred to me was that something had been missing all along in my striving. So with all of my ambition, my desire to achieve and those types of accomplishments, I had missed this whole part of myself. And so at a certain point, I kind of hit a wall, and I just stopped working and went into a very, a deep phase of personal reflection. I went to my GP saying, at one point and said, look, I'm chronically depressed here. I can't seem to do anything. And he said, well, most of my clients are guys like you, type A behavior, very ambitious guys, have worked in the corporate world their entire lives, and they're all on antidepressants. And he said, in fact, 40% of the male doctors in Calgary are on antidepressants, so you should take them.
Oh, my.
And I took one pill, and I just thought, I am not taking this, because I felt terrible. And I thought, there has to be another way to crack this open, whatever's going on internally. And shortly thereafter, a good friend of mine, coincidentally, I met in a coffee shop, waiting for a cup of coffee, said she was going to Costa Rica to do ayahuasca, which I'd been reading about. And I said, well, let me know how it goes. And a couple of weeks later, she sent me a one-word text, and all it said was, go.
When was that?
That was 2019.
19. Okay. Oh, that's relatively recent.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. And so, because I needed to find a way to crack open this mystery of what was wrong with me, why after all this success did I feel like such a failure?
Yeah, and that's a shared feeling I think a lot of people have.
Yeah.
You were in the oil and gas world in Alberta. I mean, that just feels like a different beast.
Yeah.
But in any industry, you've got people who are striving for success, and they are successful. Like you mentioned, doctors, lawyers, all these traditional careers or non-traditional, and they're not happy, but they've got money, they've got houses, some have marriages, some have failed marriages, they're not happy.
Yeah, and I saw among my peers that it was quite common for people to, especially among the men that I knew, a lot of men had similar issues that I had, and they just kept it to themselves and kind of coped. People tried to find ways to cope with more money or drinking or whatever.
Yeah.
But there was a deeper sense of dissatisfaction. And so, I felt it was time to do some personal work, and I didn't want to take antidepressants. So the plant medicine avenue really appealed to me because it seemed like it was natural.
Yes. And so the you that you described prior to 2019, I that's why I've been a little bit, like I've read your book. I read it actually a while ago. I didn't realize it was so recent because I feel like I know the new you. And it feels like I've known you forever. And it seems like this is you. And what you've described as the old you, you're not like that at all. At all.
Well, it's interesting though. I mean, the attributes that I had that were positive, not everything was negative in those days. I mean, ambition, wanting to do well, self-improvement, wanting to excel at something.
Yes.
I haven't lost any of those attributes. It's just that who I am in the middle of it, the reason I do those things now has changed dramatically. Because for me, I had been driven by a need for recognition, a need to be special, a need to be seen in a certain light, because I lacked those intrinsic feelings about myself. I had an inner lack, and that was the obsessive workaholism and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So what's changed now is that I'm much more at peace with who I am, but I can now set about to do things that matter to me with the same desire to do well or to, have a positive outcome, but I'm not tied to that. It doesn't affect my inner well-being.
Just, the fact is that there are all these tools available, right? And I mean, if you're listening and you want a place to start, I'd say start with Murray's book, The Psychedelic CEO. What a beautiful book. Because you put so many of your own learnings. I felt like I was really there with you. Mm-hmm. You talked about, I think you also talked about past lives. You talked about what you saw. You talked about your life in the before times, then and after, and how you integrated these lessons. Because I think some people have this impression that you do this thing once and then so what? It's like, no, it's not like that. I mean, if you choose the plant medicine path, there's beautiful integration work that's also important to do, and seeing your life change as a result of you changing is just beautiful. It's very powerful. But tell us what it actually feels like in an ayahuasca ceremony. What's that like?
Well, I can only speak from personal experience, but basically you fall off a cliff into a territory that is completely unknown to you in your daily life. And for me, there was one of my initial experiences was a past life review. It was where, it was like a near-death experience whereby you're actually shown all the things that have happened to you through your life, but also the things you've done to others. You're accountable. You develop an accountability to realize that it wasn't just you as a victim of things. It's like you perpetuated things as well, and you have to own that. So there's this deep reckoning with your own humanity. But out of that comes forgiveness of others and yourself. That's unexpected, because I think most of us go into these experiences thinking, well, I'm going to get helped and I'm going to get shown beautiful things. And, and it's all going to be, a pretty sweet ride. And in fact, there is a very hard aspect of accountability as well. And out of that comes humility. And the other thing too that I found most striking in all of those experiences was when something fearful comes to mind, or an image comes to you that's frightening, if you breathe into it and surrender to love, it always transforms to love.
I agree. Absolutely.
Which was a real teaching.
Yeah.
Is that no matter how frightening an experience is in that journey, in behind it is love.
Yes.
And so there was a great teaching in that about opening your heart again and again and again and experiencing love.
Right. I think many of us who've had these experiences with plant teachers have a very similar story.
Yeah.
I definitely do.
Yeah.
I definitely do.
Yeah, it's fascinating that and so that writing the book, when I came out of 2 weeks of doing ayahuasca, I was like, what a great leadership development tool this is, because the amount of self-awareness that you gain from doing this is extraordinary. And no leadership development program really achieves that. And I thought, this is so efficient. It's such an efficient tool to gain self-knowledge, self-awareness, and maybe contextualize some of the wounds that had motivated us in the first place, right?
And that's actually one of the most compelling themes in your book, is exploring that wounded leader.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk a little bit about that. But what is this wounded leader concept?
Well, I think it's not just leaders. I think it's just humans. We all carry traumas. We all carry experiences that shape us. And a lot of times it moves into the subconscious and it becomes a subconscious drive. And so we end up at a certain place in life wondering, how did we get here? What was the underlying motivation for that? And oftentimes it was some deep-rooted pain or wound or experience, that we tried to cope with. And so sometimes it's a reaction to something in the past that led us to this present place. So that sense that something's wrong or missing, that when we get to that place of success, is we haven't recognized what the wound really was, or what was that traumatic event. The psychedelic experience allows you to gain a window into that and to reframe it.
Absolutely. To finally look at it, to see it, to address it, to reframe it, to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I think the idea of, and you're right, I feel like I agree that comment resonates, that everyone has these wounds. So it isn't just the wounded leader. But the wounded leader as a concept, that's very troubling, because our social and, our corporate institutions, government institutions are run by leaders. Like leadership is very important.
Yeah.
And so when you have a wounded leader, you will likely have a very wounded organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I can use my own personal experience that I think there was a direct correlation between the degree of woundedness I had and the amount of ambition that I had. And that's a controversial subject.
Wow.
I mean, I've said that to several
people. Can you say that again? That's powerful. The degree of woundedness you had
was directly proportional to the amount of ambition that I had. And so I speak personally on that one, but I have had conversations, not always pleasant conversations, with other men that I know about that. I will say things like, the deeper the wound, the greater the ambition, the greater the desire to own a whole bunch of stuff and to have more money. I think there's a correlation. I've had a lot of guys like literally push back very hard on that and say, that just isn't me. That's not true. Ooh. I'm like, well,
but that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually does resonate. I think that's really powerful.
Well, it certainly was the case for me. I can't say it applies to every other person for sure, but it was the case for me. I could directly correlate that I kept trying to compensate for the wound by doing more and having more.
Yes. I know of people in my own life that are deeply wounded and deeply ambitious. And for them, like, it might not manifest that way for a lot of people, but some people that I know of that are very accomplished in the outside sort of world, have a lot of money, a lot of assets, but my goodness, the wounds are so deep there. And you kind of wonder, okay, so what is the motivation? What's driving you?
Yeah. And you know, it's not one size fits all, for sure. Of course, yeah. But I think that doing this type of work is so useful for anyone to just gain a window and a bit more self-awareness about who we are and how we've gotten to where we've gotten to.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's a direct correlation for everyone, but I think this is a really powerful tool to gain self-awareness. Because here's the thing about the leadership industry. It's been studied to death, and leadership has been studied to death by, Harvard Business School and Stanford and all the big universities around the world have departments that study all of this. So there's a tremendous amount of research, which I cover in my book. And the conclusions again and again and again were leadership development programs generally don't work for a couple of reasons. And those reasons are generally, they don't create an avenue for self-knowledge, true self-knowledge for those leaders who are taking the program. And they won't challenge the ego-based issues of power and control and fear that most people carry. And so as a result, there's no transformation that really occurs in most leadership development programs. Tools are created, awareness is created, new knowledge is conveyed, all of which is valuable.
Right.
I went through programs like that. My companies did as well. It was valuable to get these insights, but I didn't fundamentally change, and neither did my people.
Right.
So psychedelics, are one tool which can foster a real fundamental change in self-awareness and ego.
Yeah, and facilitate healing.
And facilitate healing
There's
in
tremendous,
whatever context that means to the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. But that wounded leader, phenomenon, like, the research that you cite in your book and just the research that's been done out there, that research is being done, these things are being studied by people who are also wounded. So I wonder then, is there a sort of a cap in terms of the learnings that we can really... takeaways?
Yes, because the real leadership occurs in understanding your own truth, your own journey, your own story, and you learn to lead yourself. Leadership is about leading yourself and managing yourself and understanding yourself, and so you hopefully then are perpetuating more good than harm on those around you.
Yes.
I think that's the job of the leader, is self-knowledge.
Absolutely. Well, imagine the leader who is not motivated by ego-driven ambition and power and control, because those wounds are now healed. So then now what is that leader motivated by? It is the good, I hope anyway, the good of community, of people, of the people that they lead. Yeah. That's a very powerful way and a very important way for companies then to have purpose, for people to have purpose, for people to be up to so good. You want to sing it.
You want me to sing it?
Okay, don't you want to? Because Murray, after your experiences and you wrote your book, you were
up to so good.
You have your psychedelic experiences, and you've worked with the plant teachers, and we've worked on these things together too. So this is really beautiful. So I love that you're open about your story. You're a published author. You talk about it in your book. But how has that changed you then and your leadership style?
I think I've become less involved in what's going on, in a way where I'm not the subject of the endeavor. I'm a facilitator of the endeavor. So in a way, I've become kind of invisible, at least in my own inner experience of it. It's not about me. It's not about, am I having influence or not having influence? It's, am I able to facilitate the endeavor in a way that allows everyone to shine? And so I've taken myself out of the equation.
Oh, beautiful.
So it's more like I'm just a servant to the situation.
Yeah.
And that's very different, because in the past I wanted it to be all about me.
Yeah, so many leaders do. I think this mindset of servant leadership is actually, you've heard that term.
Yes, I have, and I think it's a great term.
Yeah.
And the thing about the psychedelics too is I think it refines your intuition. It gets your own ego blocks out of the way and allows one to become much more empathetic to those around them and more sensitive to the dynamics of the group. And also, in a way, you can interpret more accurately where the other people are at, because your own stuff is not in the way. So you can feel if another person is upset, or you can feel if their ego is pushing, you can feel if there's some kind of dysfunction guiding their action. And then you can act more appropriately and help the situation in a more constructive way.
Yes, I 1000% agree with that. I mean, that's how I found that it's worked in my own life. You also talk about in your book, and I also just love this, your view of Mother Earth. And I think it's a view that I wish more people had. And to go from oil and gas and that aspect of what the Earth was to this new version. Can you talk a bit about that?
One of the common research findings from all the psychedelic research that's been done around the world now, and there's dozens and dozens of papers written by very respected neuroscientists and researchers now, one of the common outcomes of psychedelics, whatever type it is, whether it's ayahuasca, DMT, or mushrooms, LSD, or any of them, is almost uniformly an outcome is that people come out of an experience like this feeling more connected to the earth. And that doesn't matter. That's irrespective of who they are, in what part of the world they've done it, what their age, stage, social status, cultural reality is. They feel more connected to the planet, which is a really extraordinary outcome in its own right. So if that's all that happens after a psychedelic experience, that's a profound outcome.
Absolutely.
And for me, I've always worked with the earth, in oil and gas. I'm a scientist. I love the earth. I love solving the earth's problems. And you'll find that most geoscientists or people that work in the industry are at heart real environmentalists, love the earth and care about it and love the problems, solving the problems of the earth. But what changed for me was the overprint of what is the industry's viewpoint of the earth. It's not here to serve us necessarily. We're here to serve it. And so we have to find a different way of relating to, the earth and the world around us. So that speaks to better environmental practices, better, we conduct ourselves in a more appropriate way where we respect the planet. And so it's led me to start a new company, which is exploring for natural hydrogen, which is a form of energy that the earth creates. And it is truly clean. And so I'm still in the energy business. I'm still working with geology and understanding the mysteries of Mother Earth, but I'm also working at finding out how to extract pure, clean forms of energy that are less harmful to the planet.
Incredible. To go from the extractive oil and gas traditional ways of solving our problems.
Right.
Recognizing, loving the earth as this is our home, to all of a sudden having that mindset shift of, no, this is more than just our home.
Right.
We are here, it's not here to serve us. We are here to serve it. And we do need to take care of this beautiful planet and going to a space of now natural energy sources. That's a huge shift. So your whole career has shifted.
And oil and gas are natural energy sources too. They're from the degradation of plants. I mean, the Mother Earth has created everything we need to not only survive but to flourish. But we've in a sense, kind of misuse some of those gifts. And so now it's like understanding the mystery of the planet to find out what other resources are available to us that are less harmful.
Right.
And
you're right. Oil and gas is also, it does come from Mother Earth. I agree. But I feel like we have just really perverted the use and we've misused it. The burning of the fossil fuels and how that's affecting our air. Overconsumption just in general.
And consumption so and man's incessant need for more is really the problem. It's our need to consume more and more that leads to our desire for more energy, right? And so again, what this experience with plant medicine has done for me is to realize that in a lot of cases we have more than enough, and we don't need to acquire more and more and more. So in a way, it creates a more balanced perspective of the human. How much do we actually need to be happy and to be constructive human beings?
Well, it allows us also to go deeper and sort of examine why do we need more and more? Just as you were talking about it before, what is that void, that thing that we're trying to fill by just buying and consuming, growth for the sake of growth? So.
And that question is is the perfect question. And that goes to what, of course, the shamans would call the wound. You know, the wounded human has an incessant need to fill up that void and to mask the woundedness. And that's through consumption.
Yeah. As opposed to exploring that void,
right?
You know, and healing it. And finding out. So what do you think is the right thing after all this work with the plant teachers and your experiences, and like such a life shift that you've made in terms of, you know, your work that you do now, being a writer, being an author, and working in clean energy spaces. It's a very big shift from being an oil and gas executive. And so what would you say are the things that do fill that void? And I'm going to make the assumption that you were able to fill in some of that void and heal.
Well, the main thing is helping others see that there are very efficient pathways to understand themselves, and to gain healing, understanding, self-knowledge in a very efficient way, such that their lives begin to be less about filling in the gap, and they're more fulfilled just in their own right.
Just by being.
You know. And so by helping to host retreats and organizing, you know, different types of consciousness sessions, not just plant medicine, but, you know, through breath work and through music and sound and many different modalities, I find I can help others just see that there are tools you can avail yourselves of that will help you be less dissatisfied.
Yeah.
And therefore, hopefully less acquisitive.
Absolutely, yeah.
More inquisitive and maybe less acquisitive, you know.
How is purpose and your own purpose and work purpose, how do they relate to each other?
Well, in my case, if my purpose has become self-knowledge, self-management, doing more good than harm on the planet, that's my purpose. So everything I do has those tenets involved in it. And so it allows me to approach things in a much more measured way that's less motivated by what's it doing for me. It's more like, what is the impact it's having on others? It's beautiful. My sphere of influence. And the other thing is we all have a sphere of influence. It can be just one person. It can be just your family or your friends, your community. It's focusing and narrowing into a sphere of influence that I can really affect, you know, a positive change and letting that be enough. So not taking on some grand project, trying to save the world and that type of thing. It's really refining it down to what is my sphere of influence and can I affect that every day in a positive way.
Oh, I love that.
So there's kind of a humility about it as opposed to a grandiose vision.
And you take that in, I assume, into your businesses.
Yeah.
Your new businesses.
Yeah.
Are you able to tell us the name or anything more about the new energy company?
Yeah, the company's a private company. It's called Kingfisher Energy, and I have there's 5 founding partners, all very, very senior, experienced international oil and gas people that all share the same mindset. We have really very little patience for the way things have been done in the past, and we're trying to do things differently. And we're galvanized around the new science of how to explore for hydrogen.
An actual clean energy.
Yeah. It's a very exciting thing. It's new, it's risky, a lot of unknowns, but it's what we've done our entire lives anyway on the oil and gas side. So we're just taking some of those tools and some of those experiences and applying it to different aspects of the earth.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being enlightenment, we're talking Buddha level enlightenment. 1 being, I'm not going to throw myself in front of a bus, but if 1 hits me, I'm fine with that. Scale of 1 to 10. Where, before these experiences, before 2019, where would you usually rate yourself, approximately? With
10 being enlightenment and 1 being completely self-absorbed, is that kind of the idea?
I suppose, sure.
Yeah. It was probably in the 1 to 3.
1 to 3.
I think 1 to 3, you know, in that lower level, I was thinking of myself first.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I remember that the scale helped me a lot because I actually was able to sort of measure where I sat. I was in 4, 5, 6, I'd say. I was very middle of the road, kind of bored with life. 4, 5, 6 before these experiences. So now where are you at now?
Well, I'd like to say 10, but of course I'm not. I probably between 6, probably between 6 and 8. I would say. I mean, I love being alive.
Yes,
I'm thankful to be alive.
Yeah,
which was a huge change for me because I spent my entire life in a low-grade depression. up to the point, the point that I did all of this work.
I think a lot of people do.
Getting out of bed every morning thinking, when is this going to be over?
Oh my.
So that is no longer present. So that's a massive change right there. And so I covered that up with just excessive workaholism and other bad behaviors.
Yeah. Wow.
And so now it's like life is full of wonderful opportunities to grow and to do good and meet incredible people like you and to do good things. So
it's wonderful to hear that 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I feel like I too am at home higher up. I'm around 7, 8, 9. I'd say I am. There are days where I hit 9. There's some inexplicable days where I'm like, what? I'm not even on any drugs, but I'm just feeling so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah.
But the 4, 5, 6 was actually my more normal. And from what I observed, I felt like a lot of people were possibly in the 4, 5, 6, more 4 and 5. And I remember when I made a big shift in my life, like I just threw caution to the wind because life was just terrible in that 4, 5, 6. Terrible, terrible, terrible zone. Just like not a good personal relationship, not the job that really fulfilled my purpose. Right. Also having that void. Before I could ever really hit really low, I hung on to meditation, and that helped me a lot. And I found just going inward. But you know what? I feel the majority of society, so many people live in those places under that 6 mark. Mm-hmm. They're somewhere. And that's like the default. And that's really sad. And it doesn't have to be that way. Life is so beautiful. It's so short. It's so precious. You don't waste time living in a state that's below that 4, 5, 6 or whatever. Like we're worth it. Mm-hmm. It's worth it to pursue whatever you need to stay in those higher states. And it's possible. Yeah. It's actually possible.
And that's the key. It's possible, but the purpose initially is to find a tool that works for you to get through to that so that you can actually live in a higher state of joy and move out of that. Mm-hmm. And of course, use the term default. And of course, most of the neuroscience research around psychedelics talks about the fact that it disrupts the default mode network in the brain, which is the 5 nodes in the brain which lead to our habitual ways of experiencing day-to-day life. And a psychedelic experience disrupts that circuitry, throws it into a state of entropy or chaos for a short period of time, and allows us to reframe our life. And that is an elegant pathway to break that pattern of feeling that life has no purpose and life is dull and it's boring and repetitious and I can't wait for it to be over. Yeah. So that's a very elegant way for that to occur. Effective breath work will do the same thing. So you don't have to do psychedelics.
Meditation
can do it.
Music, chanting, kirtan, that's sacred chanting from our culture.
The 2 most immediate things from my experience of breath work and psychedelics actually to cause that almost instant disruption of that circuitry. But then you have a chance of really experiencing joy. And then out of that comes the purpose, or a sense of purpose, I think.
Yes.
Because it's you can't prescribe purpose to people until they have the feeling of purpose. That's a feeling state. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting feeling state, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing is I think what I try to do is encourage people to say, here's some tools that can get you very quickly to your feeling of purpose. And the joy. And
joy. And I'm not talking about, I don't think we're talking about that joy that just comes from that instant gratification of, a few drinks on the weekend. Because that can be joyful for some, it's when it becomes the crutch or abused.
It was for me. I was a weekend binge drinker. that was where the joy was, let's go and party, kind of thing. But then you're back to the same state in your daily life.
Or
right?
worse.
Or worse,
right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a crutch for a lot of people.
Yeah.
As well as zoning out and just watching Netflix,
Yeah.
And really just tuning out life. And to be on the other side of it though, isn't it amazing?
It is amazing.
Isn't life just... Yeah. Life is just so lovely, especially when it's filled with purpose.
Well, it really is, and one of the biggest changes for me is that when I go into my local coffee shop, I know the baristas, and I say, hi, how you doing? I always say, fantastic. And I would never in my old life have said that, ever. I would never say life was fantastic because I felt it wasn't. And I'd say, that's okay, or, fine. Yeah. But now it's completely different. Yeah. And so, that's just, the blessing of having done some work.
Yes.
And, opening up the wound, so to speak.
And it doesn't mean things are perfect. Like, I know my own experience, and we talked about this even before the show. We talked about how we're always doing work.
Always.
But it's just, there's something that's, I don't know, it's just so much, life is so much more rich. It's almost like being able to see more colors.
Yeah.
And really enjoy them.
Exactly. The work never stops.
The work never stops.
Yeah.
No.
but it can become joyful. And also the awareness that it's not supposed to stop. This is, we just constantly evolve and grow and
constantly
change.
learning.
And that's part of the purpose.
Yeah. And every person that one talks to that has these experiences, and here, there's also a lot of beautiful experiences people have with other psychedelics, such as mushrooms or San Pedro. But often you'll hear these stories very similar, that it is about not a fun necessarily, happy thing. It is work. And that's okay. That often you don't always get what you want, but you'll always get what you need.
Yeah.
And set and setting are very important, though. Very important, right?
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Safety is everything. I mean, that's a research finding. It's common sense, but it's also a research finding that if the setting in which a person does that journey is really set up very well for safety and support, the person will have a positive outcome, no matter how challenging the experience is. If it's not a safe setting, and you hear this all the time, I bet in my generation, the baby boomers, almost everybody had some kind of traumatic experience with mushrooms or LSD and alcohol in high school.
Right.
You run across that comment so many times, and I'm like, I'll never touch it again, because that really freaked me out.
Yes.
Well, it was the wrong setting.
Absolutely.
And it was a mix of substances.
Yes.
The wrong music.
Yes.
The wrong people.
Yes.
The whole thing.
Absolutely.
And absolutely, you're going to have a terrible experience.
Yeah, of course.
If that occurs. But if it's done with a sacred or a therapeutic overprint, the chances of having a positive outcome are almost 100%.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. And I feel like that is something that we can't stress enough, that if people want to try this as one of the tools, right? It's not the only one. I mean, there's so many other things.
Yeah.
And meditation is deeply helpful, and healing and yoga and all these other gorgeous practices are there. Reading about all kinds of people and their own experiences with consciousness is also very, very valuable and very important. But I can't stress enough that people should really be careful about accessing things like, say, mushrooms, and going out and just by themselves, just taking a big dose. Yeah. Or, like you said, music is really important, and just playing any old music. It's not like that. Sacred and or therapeutic, absolutely. Yeah. And making sure that is deeply safe will result in a good experience. Yeah,
the safety is critical. And you mentioned the music thing, and another clinical finding from research that's being done is that the music that's played in one of these experiences is almost 50% of the therapeutic outcome.
Ah, really?
Yeah, so the music is absolutely critical to a positive experience.
Wow.
And that in itself is interesting. Of course, in the indigenous traditions, in the Amazon, the spirits would create the songs, the Icaros, and they would sing. Shamans would sing throughout the experience, and it would be your own unique song that would come through.
Beautiful.
In a spiritual sense. But there are a lot of any kind of music can be very, very powerful if it has meaning for the individual, but it has to be carefully curated and thought about too.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, deeply uplifting spiritual music, in my experience, has probably been some of the best as the background for a lot of this. But I think it also really does vary from participant to participant because of their background, their lineage, and working with actual shamans. I mean, that's probably the most powerful way to work with much of this. And so what was that like? Because you worked with several shamans, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very powerful experience to work with, traditional shamans, and they're basically doctors. They're, they've been doing it since they were children, and so they're very, very practiced at creating a sacred setting and holding space for large groups of people, small or large groups of people. The music and the ritual and the power that they bring and the presence that they bring to it is really quite profound. Yes. It's a big part of the successful outcome of the experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, and that also goes to if they have trained facilitators that are maybe are not of their background. What I've noticed is those facilitators will hold out where they've been trained and what their lineage is, and that they are facilitators. So be very careful about going to just, Shaman Chad, who had just calls himself a shaman. Nope. Right away. That's not up to so good.
Yeah. Well, there's a big difference between a shaman and an ayahuasquero. An ayahuasquero is someone that's trained to serve the medicine, but they're not yet a shaman, because a shaman is like our equivalent of a medical doctor.
Right.
They've had the training.
Yes.
And the so-called spiritual certification. And a lot of people do pose and call themselves shamans or even ayahuasqueros, and they shouldn't be serving the medicine at all.
Yeah.
I would never serve ayahuasca. I'm not qualified to do any of that. All I can do is point someone in the right direction, say, those are people you should work with.
Yes. Yeah. So you had all these sort of epiphanies when you worked with the plant medicine, but you had also said that you had done about 8 ceremonies over the course of 2 weeks.
Right.
And so was it a gradual process this awakening started happening, or was it at the end of those 2 weeks? How did that work for you?
It was not a linear process. Every ceremony was different, but I was introduced to many of the fundamental issues that had been a problem for me and throughout my life, starting with my birth, where my mother and I had nearly died when I was being born because my head was too big, and they pulled me out with forceps, and she was bleeding to death, and we both nearly died. And I'd had a low-grade depression my entire life and a feeling I should not be alive, and I never understood that. And during an ayahuasca journey, it was shown to me that, in fact, that was not my voice. That was my mother's voice. She wanted to die during childbirth because she was in so much pain. Wow. And I had internalized her voice. And that was revealed to me through the ayahuasca experience. And I never, ever revisited that terrain again after having that experience. I felt joy about being alive, and I felt really good about being part of the human experience. So that was incredible.
Did you know prior to going in that your mother had a difficulty?
I knew the facts of it, but she never spoke about it, never spoke about any of the emotion around it or anything.
Right.
So I just knew it was a fact, but I didn't know any impact it had on her or me emotionally. So that was one. Then my father came from a line of alcoholics. I was introduced to that whole ancestral trauma that had led to my grandfather and my father being alcoholics. And in fact, I was placed in their reality so I could experience what it was like for them and what the source of their trauma was and what led to their alcoholism. And that allowed me to to experience true forgiveness of my own father and my grandfather, and to understand that there was this ancestral trauma that had come through the male side of the family and had affected me as well. So that was a whole other night of ayahuasca, where it was just dealing with my father and grandfather, the male part of my lineage. And there was another experience whereby I went through what they call ego death, where you do literally feel like you're dying. And what all that really means is that your known structure, your way of being psychologically, has been opened up, and you're letting go of all of that. And that's primarily the loss of control that people fear before they do one of these journeys. They feel they're going to die if they lose control, or they lose a sense of who they think they are. But in fact, that's what needs to happen to have your whole spiritual being opened up. And so then I went through that experience, and then what happened was that it was like the universe opened up for me with all these stars. And I was looking through like a grid now where I could see all these stars, but there was like this structure around me. And what was shown to me, what the medicine told me, was you now have a divinely infused ego. It means you need an ego to survive on this planet. You need to be able to protect yourself and do things. So you need to have a sense of yourself, but it's now infused by a spiritual or divine aspect. So it's not this closed container of small ego. And that was another experience I had. And so these unfolded, like I say, not in a linear way, but through the course of 8 different journeys. And that was the equivalent of about 3.5 full days in deep psychedelic experience over that 8-week or that 2-week period.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of medicine and a lot of work that was done So, and sometimes there was just great beauty. Sometimes there's great pain and sorrow. Lots of vomiting and purging, because ayahuasca is a purgative. And so what you're shown is that the more you, in my case, anytime I lied to myself, I was asked a question by the medicine, and she would say, is this true or is this not true? If I lied to myself, I would vomit.
Yeah.
But if I spoke the truth, I would not. And so it kept me accountable to my own truths.
That's amazing. Wow. It's so beautiful, because everyone you speak to that works with these plant teachers is going to have a different experience, but one that is so incredibly perfectly tailored to what they have needed their whole lives, And there's also some common threads, like I too have seen my own parents and their wounds and traumas and what they went through and why they did. And it's sort of different from yours. But the similar thing was it just evoked so much love and compassion and gratitude that they're my parents.
Yeah.
And also that question of why. Like I feel like there are many things that sometimes you're shown that we are able to just connect the dots and recognize why things have happened a certain way versus why they haven't. And everything just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you're in the place of medicine.
Well, it does. And even on the business side, there was so much information shown to me in terms of things that were challenging for me as a business leader that actually originated in my childhood, like my fear of confronting my father, who was a violent alcoholic. Manifested, I couldn't take on my board of directors and argue a case that I knew was the right case for the company because I was afraid of the repercussions. So when in fact, I had projected onto the board of directors my relationship with my father. Amazing. And that was shown to me during an ayahuasca journey.
Yeah.
How that deep wounding had led to some of the weaknesses that I had as a leader.
Behaviors. Yeah, absolutely. See, like it really is like therapy, a lot of therapy, intense therapy in a short amount of time.
It really is. It's very concentrated. People shouldn't be afraid to look at themselves, because it's a magical journey and it's full of wonderful surprises. So anytime you feel resistance or fear or that sense of, I don't want to lose control, just surrender to it, because there's so much beauty and love in behind all of that.
Well, it was super important for me to have you on this podcast, because the podcast is called Up to So Good, really inspiring people to elevate themselves and their businesses, right? And explore the purpose of business. But I think we can't do that unless we explore our own purpose. And in meeting you, you're so inspiring and a kindred spirit. And I feel like you're one of the most purposeful individuals I've ever met, that you've really found your purpose and you help inspire others to find theirs. Given where you are in terms of your elevated understanding of what leadership now is, and you're healing many of your wounds, what is it like when you work maybe with others who are not quite there?
That's a great question. When I first came back from the original 2 weeks in Costa Rica after having done the ayahuasca before I wrote the book, I was on a board of directors of a company, and I remember being on a board call. It was during COVID, and so we weren't physically present, but I was on it was just a conference call. We weren't even on Zoom at the time, but I was listening to all the voices and the perspectives that the board members had. And I remember thinking to myself, these guys are all mentally ill. And that was my first, I could not say that to myself, because I had done 8 ayahuasca journeys in 2 weeks. And then I was thrown into this board call, and the perspectives around was just money and just greed and maneuvering.
Wow.
And the level of discourse was so stark in contrast to what I had experienced
discordant
in 2 weeks.
Versus
the discordance
harmonious.
Was unbelievable. But obviously I've softened my stance since then. Of course, I have a lot of compassion for people, and I can feel where they're at. And I just try to work with that. Because I can feel that a lot of it's fear-based. Mm-hmm. A lot of the things that we would, in business that we tend to see as kind of distorted or discordant, in fact, rooted in fear.
Yes.
And so knowing that, it allows me to feel compassion and kind of work with that as opposed to against it.
You kind of meet people where they're at.
Yeah, you meet people where they're at. Yeah. And then hopefully there's a way to maybe bring it along to a little bit of a different level. Mm-hmm. But the judgment has been removed. There's just a feeling sense now of where the room is at. Is this a fear-based conversation or is it something else? And that allows me to then adjust to that circumstance.
So after the experiences you've had, you've written your book, you've changed, the kind of business you work in now. What does it take to make a good CEO?
I think humility, self-awareness, a great sense of humor, and the knowledge that you're dispensable.
I love that. Again, humility, self-awareness, good sense of humor.
Great sense of humor.
Great sense of humor.
And the knowledge that you're dispensable. Or your really job should be to become dispensable. That means you've served your people well enough that they have all the tools they need to excel.
Yes. I want to add compassion and kindness to that, Having that compassion is so important. The empathy is so important.
Yeah.
I feel like here, I'm at All Purpose, I feel like we embody a lot of those principles, but I know that within our leadership team, we do work a little differently, a little more aligned with you, I think. I feel it anyway. And I think it makes all the difference.
Yeah, I think it does make all the difference. And you do hit on a great point, like kindness, kindness or compassion and empathy, those kind of wrapped up in one. That for me comes out of humility. Yes. Humility is a very broad umbrella from where I sit, and it incorporates those. But I'm glad you mentioned those words because I think that is that can be in short supply. When there's a lot of fear that's driving the enterprise, kindness and empathy tend to fall by the wayside.
That's true. Yeah, it's true. Being able to hear someone and their point of view and where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And having compassion and empathy for that, it's because in business, we're not always going to align.
Yeah.
And having space for those kinds of conversations without any concern that there's ulterior motives, where people have each other's backs, where it's very safe.
Yeah.
I think executive teams that work that way, oh my goodness. I mean, we know that feeling.
Well, and that's another finding on the research on leadership. One of the limitations of most development programs is they don't teach leaders how to create an environment of psychological safety so that people in the organization are safe to be themselves and to express themselves as human beings. So you hit on another really important point, and so that comes with this idea of serving your people. In a lot of, let's say in the oil and gas business, discussions around mental health were never, ever had, ever. You wouldn't even use that term back in the day when I was in the industry, and I think things have probably changed a lot now. But again, there are lots of studies done on companies that really focus on the well-being and so-called mental health, but mental well-being of their people are more profitable. You think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
That's if you're all about the money, you'd be well served to serve your people and their well-being and make that your mission. They will make you more money.
You hear that? People listening or watching, if you want all the money, you take care of the people.
Yeah.
If you want more money, it affects the bottom line. That
Absolutely.
Makes sense. Absolutely.
Like that's an incredible idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. The short-term thinking is the one that doesn't think about the mental health.
Right. One of the companies that I helped build, which was a unique company in Calgary, and I had a wonderful team of executives. It certainly wasn't just me, but we only had 5 people quit over a 5-year period, and we had hundreds of employees and 1,000 consultants, and we're spending like $500 million a year.
Wow.
And we had almost no turnover, and that was because of all of these principles I was talking about. And that was even before I got into plant medicine. So some of these things I think that we're talking about, they exist.
Yes.
Without plant medicine and that type of thing. There are a lot of really good people leading companies and so on, but it's still that conversation needs to broaden and needs to be more pervasive.
And those companies that are led by really good leaders, I mean, I think the common attributes are what we talked about, really being there to serve the people, having compassion and humility
Yeah.
and, being of service, having a good sense of humor, all of these things that are creating safety. And whether or not you embark in these tools as your pathway, the truth is that is a constant. And it still shocks me how business is there's still a lot of that toxic sort of, it isn't just toxic masculinity and patriarchy, but that's a big part of it. But there's a toxicity in leadership. There's this driven to succeed at.
Well, I think there's so much fear.
Yeah.
I think that what's really toxic, and this isn't about men or women or anything else, is the amount of fear that pervades so many businesses.
Yeah, and insecurity.
Right?
I mean, we've seen those leaders who are controlling at all costs.
Yeah.
Okay, in other types of jobs, though, I've seen it where you've got those leaders who are, probably driven by insecurity. Maybe there is a little bit of a false sense of satisfaction by getting people to do what you need them to do. And it's very short-lived, though, because, people have choices of where they can work. They'll leave you. But isn't it so much better for a leader to not have to think about that? To be on another side where you're relaxed. You're in a joyful state. Your team is in a joyful state. And I think some people are afraid of not being so type A because then things won't get done. And I have not had that experience. I find that our team is fantastic. And if you along the way find people who are not pulling their weight or who are not doing things, then they're not really supposed to be in your environment. And that's okay too. Being kind is not the same thing as being weak.
Right.
And people have to get over that.
Well, with men, in that sort of male paradigm that I was involved in, kindness was often equated with weakness, and feeling was equated with weakness. And one of my great friend of mine we helped build a company together, an engineer, used to pull all his operating guys into a room, and I was, the boss at the time, and he would prep them. He would say, "Now I got to tell you guys, when Murray comes into the room, he might ask you how you feel about something," and they would laugh uproariously as though that was the weirdest thing they could imagine, because this was like man type group. And so at the time, even just saying the word "how do you feel" was met with a lot of derision. So that's changed a lot.
Well, we see it also the other thing that I do as well, in addition to working here, is some film and TV work. And you do see that mindset in the film and TV world as well, where being kind is equated to being weak. And, have you heard of the stories where, I don't know which director it is, but he basically gets on set and fires someone to show this show of power. The show of power. What the hell is that? Fire someone. Look, because we know also those leaders who are so kind and embody these principles, but they're afraid to say fire a dumbass. Well, they're afraid to fire somebody who's awful. And that's not good. That's not what we're saying. I don't think that's necessarily strong leadership. You have to be tough.
That isn't what we're saying at all. I mean, the fact is you have to have boundaries. Have to have boundaries and know what your principles are as a leader.
Yes.
And what's good for the organization, what's good for the team, and you need to take right action.
Yes.
So that's what this self-awareness is all about. It's being self-aware enough to know that when you have to take an action, it's the right action. It can be a tough action, but it can still be done with kindness or dignity or decency or respect.
Yes.
But it's still a tough action.
And it's also the motivation as to why. Because I remember we were doing some filming in I think it was in Raleigh or New York. I don't know. We had a big project for a giant enterprise client where we were doing both design as well as media. And so there I was, and I had been managing these crews, the film crews, all year. I had taken one weekend off, and I was here managing it from here, and had sent one of my counterparts out there to manage it. And he's a lovely, strong male energy. So he'd worked with that crew. The next month, I went and worked with this new crew. So they didn't realize that, not only am I their boss, but I was also their boss's boss, because they had, in their minds, thought that the director who had been working that shoot was their boss. So I get on set, and I'm just not happy with the framing of something. The pushback I got was shocking, and I thought, oh no, I have to deal with this again. A lot of women directors also find when they go on set, there's a little bit of friction until they can prove themselves, until the moment they say sound speed, camera, action, until they're like really So I actually, the shortcut there was I had our CEO, Robin, I got him to come upstairs, introduce himself, introduce me, and that helped everyone kind of align themselves. They needed him to set the stage.
I think that sounds to me like that was the classic male-female thing as opposed to a kindness thing. I think it was.
I guess that one was, yeah.
I think, unfortunately, that's still an endemic problem, is that, that inherent sexism that exists
I feel
everywhere.
like you understand it, which is like beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're my token white male, but you understand. I've
Yeah.
talked to you about this stuff extensively.
I know. And unfortunately, it hasn't changed that much because there are still those biases in organizations, right? And a woman has to work harder to prove herself, And then, of course, the paradox is the tougher you are, you get labeled negatively that way too. So in a way, it's still a challenge because the statistics are still not great in terms of female representation on boards of directors and in senior leadership positions and that type of thing. It's changed a lot, but the statistics are still not fantastic.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's also a lot of research findings that having boards of directors that are at least equal representation, male and female, and management teams as well, are more functional than not. And yet, most boards of directors are primarily male dominated.
Yeah.
I see that in my world all the time, and it's almost an afterthought where the men on the board go, whoa, we need to have a female on the board.
Yeah, that's it. It's probably
it's
not even intentional.
Tokenism. It's just, it's still kind of a strange
It's a bit
construct.
of our unconscious biases, actually. Like I was joking around about her earlier. We've had a lot of female led organizations here, a lot of female CEOs and such in our show. And that was not on purpose. It just, I don't know. This is just who I was reaching out to. And our producer is a woman, and we have a very strong female-driven set. And all of a sudden, that our bias creeped in. Yeah. It happened.
Yeah. Well, when I started doing all this personal work and going to like yoga teacher training and then the ayahuasca retreats, mainly women were doing all of this personal work. And that was a huge eye-opener for me in terms of, this will sound like a really weird statement to make, but my eyes were opened so dramatically in terms of the power, the intelligence, the capability of women in general, because I'd come from such a patriarchal world that I, in fact, hadn't paid attention to. Plant medicine exposed me to the feminine in such a profound way, where I'm now like, let's get more women in here because we're going to screw it up. Guys are going to screw it up. Let's get more women in here and figure this out. I really believe that because it just, it's changed completely for me.
Well, it'd be beautiful if there was strong balance.
Balance is the ideal, of course, but it's, and
right now there isn't. And even with some of the women who are in power, sometimes that imbalance shows up too. I won't say exactly which organization or what, but it was a female lead I had to let go of because she was embodying a lot of those toxic patriarchal masculine principles, because that worked for her. And she'd been in this industry, in the industry that I had been working in for so many years, and like in order to be heard, she had to be a bulldog, and she had to like really show power. And so I don't blame her, but we were trying to do things differently, and unfortunately that there was no room for that type of toxic behavior anymore.
I think what we're really talking about, in terms of all of doing the personal work, is you reconcile the feminine and masculine parts of yourself and allow that to flourish in the other, male or female, and achieve a healthy balance within you, within oneself, and then you allow that to perpetuate throughout your organization.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. We'll end it there. I want to thank my guest, Murray Rodgers, author of the Psychedelic CEO. And we'll have that on our website, a link there so you can download the book and purchase the book. I've read it. I highly recommend it. It's really wonderful. So many more of your own experiences and life lessons are detailed in the book. And I found that it was very applicable, even though, I'm a South Asian brown girl, and yet I found it's very applicable to my own life. And so thank you for that. Thank you for so openly sharing your experiences. I feel like the key, the main theme that we have explored in today's podcast is just in order to be really up to so good and purpose driven, you've got to take steps in figuring out who you are, what makes you tick, what's your purpose, and things start to fall into place.
Thank you, Lena. It's been a real honor having this conversation with you. Thank you. And you really are up to so good.
Oh, it's just the hair color I chose. It's up to so good. And that concludes today's podcast, and of course produced by All Purpose, a beautiful design and media agency, our beloved All Purpose, and JPod Creations. Love them too. We'll see you next time. Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, hit the like button, or share an episode. And if you have any feedback, questions, or comments, or show ideas, you can email us directly at hello@allpurpose.io. Thank you once again for joining us. We'll see you next time.